Hi, folks. My name is Jay Emerlinson, and I'm a transformation engineering lead here at Software AG and a specialist in the ARIS platform. And today we're doing another in our Art of the Possible series. In this one, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my thoughts from years of experience doing ARIS consulting on some of the best practices you can use inside the tool to help you get your projects done, manage your environments better, and help you make better business decisions on your transformation initiatives. Today, and for this video, we're going to be talking a little bit more about federated models of control versus centralized models of control within ARIS. And that's going to bridge a lot into how one might want to both manage the application itself, manage the content within the ARIS application, and the permissions and controls that are given to different user groups depending on what their responsibilities are. But let's start with talking about what at a granular, or actually at a very high level, what I mean by each of these things. So when I talk about a centralized versus a federated environment, I'm talking about whether or not you're controlling global environment of process, a global breakdown and hierarchy of process models from the very top to the very bottom, and having everyone sort of slot in through that sort of central model that decomposes down from top to bottom. When I'm talking about federated, I'm talking about using things that are more departmental, having each department have its own environment, have its own repository of reusable knowledge. If you take a look at my previous video on libraries, you might see one of the reasons why we talk about reusable knowledge and why you want to keep it centralized and controlled. But that centralization doesn't necessarily have to be organizational wide. It can be departmental wide. And then processes that are specific to each of those environments without necessarily a connection to a central process hierarchy or environment. Now, in the example we have in this United Motor Group environment, we're looking at more of a centralized model. When I take a look at my business processes, I'm going to take a look at a diagram that decomposes from the very top to the very bottom. We're going to be able to go down each of these different stocks. And what's going to happen is we're going to be giving people permissions and control at a more granular level at each of the folders underneath this central stock. So for instance, if I go into marketing and sales, I'm going to have the marketing and sales people with access to their marketing and sales environment, but you see that it does connect back through what we call assignment relationships within ARIS. And today, as a tech tip, I'm going to show you a couple of things, both how to create assignments and also how to create group structures. Now, there's some pretty good advantages to this. Everything has its context clearly defined within the enterprise. So you can follow things back upwards. So I can go upwards in hierarchy up to my process architecture from everywhere I am. So for instance, I'm going to my sales order management scenario with my 5 different processes happening. I can always head up back and say, oh, I'm part of marketing and sales, I'm part of my core processes, I'm part of the process architecture. And this button right over here, this go up in hierarchy, is very handy for that particular piece of the puzzle. So you know that you're always fitting into the decomposition of how the organization works. Now, where this can struggle is that there can be variation within within an enterprise, and actually it's pretty common that different departments, different organizations might have different reusable knowledge sets, and they might want to fit into their own context and not have to define and fit into a centralized model that necessarily sort of shoehorns them into the way in which somebody at this enterprise level saw the enterprise breaking down. Perhaps this model of how the core processes work for the enterprise, maybe you don't necessarily fit into this exactly the way that it was described. So instead, what we find some of our organizations doing is federating a lot of that work and splitting it into different business lines, different entire environments. And so when we talked about before about those the library idea, where I have a library of application systems, a library of data, a library of capabilities, all those sorts of things, I can actually break that library down instead of having a global library. What I can do instead, and I'm going to go over here and actually demonstrate how to set up different folder structures. So instead of having this main stock, what I can do is I can actually create different groups. So I'm going to do Z underscore business unit 1. And I'm going to do Z underscore business unit 2. Now you can see to create each of these groups, I'm clicking on over here on these 3 dots right there. I'm saying create group. I can also choose create group over here. It's going to create a group underneath what I'm doing. And then each of these groups, so I'm going to do z underscore business unit 2. Each of these groups is going to have its own library of content and its own structure that leads up to its master process model that contains everything within it. So for instance, I'm going to have my systems. Now, note that the systems for business unit 1 and the systems for business unit 2 might be completely different, and with control of who can view each of these different folders, they might not ever see each other. They might pass like ships in the night. Now, this does leave a vulnerability, for instance, if there's redundancy between the two. So for instance, let's say I have 2 applications who provide the same payment processing service. The redundancies would not be as easily viewable by either of these 2 business units, only by the master, like the global business unit or the global control, if there is any, that could go in and see all the different business units stacked up against each other and all the redundancies and be able to help identify those later on. So what I could do is I could federate this out, have everyone have their own process stocks, their own reusable knowledge libraries, and be able to create things under that. So for instance, here's my business unit 1. I'm going to create a model. I'm going to call it a value-added chain diagram, which is how I usually structure things. I'm going to call it BU1 process map, and I'll hit OK. And that's going to create a brand new model for me that's just going to be for BU1. We're not have to worry about how any of these things, and for instance, they might have all those functions we saw before in the enterprise process map, whether they be their own version of accounts payable, their own version of legal, their own version of IT support. That's fine. If you want to structure it like this is a little bit easier to start small and have each BU sort of own their own content. But once again, it does have some weaknesses. And let's say I had a couple of different scenario 1 and scenario 2 and all those sorts of things underneath here. And that's handy to just create these things. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a model underneath that describes it the way that I would sort of lay out the hierarchy for this particular scenario under the BU process map. To do that, I'm going to click on this assignments button. It looks like a little link, and create a new assignment. And I'm going to choose another value-added chain diagram. I'm actually just going to decompose it 1 level to a value-added chain diagram underneath it. And suddenly you'll see that this now has this little model assignment icon. Now it is linked in with the scenario 1 model underneath it. So here's scenario 1. I'm going to expand this up. I'm going to move this just to the top. So I'm going to drag that up here and add a few different processes. There we are. Here's process 1 underneath scenario 1. So I'm actually creating this hierarchy both within assignments and also through decomposition. I'm using the nesting technique I talked about in a previous video as well. And so this makes it very easy for me to control, which people have access to which information and how the decomposition is handled by each different business unit, by each different person. So a centralized model is good if you can do it. It keeps everything together. It keeps the context strong. But a federated model might be a little easier to either A, start with, or B, if you have fragmented business units that want to run their own use cases and have their own libraries of applications, libraries of roles, and things like that. There is one other thing that I want to talk about in this video is that there is a third option. And we find a lot of organizations doing this. We call it the hybrid option. So instead of having everything completely disconnected between different business units that have the complete own control of both processes and systems, as well as maybe organizational units and risks and controls and all that stuff, what we'll do is we'll have a global library. So these IT systems might be our global library of systems. And then each business unit can have their local library of application systems or organizational units or things like that that are specific to them and only relevant to them in their context. So instead of requiring that a global library pick up, your homegrown app that does just, time tracking for your people, well, just put it in your application library, your system library right here in BU1. And you don't have to worry about whether or not this is going to apply to other people. And that's kind of handy. That keeps things fresh for just you, and you can fully control that object. You don't have to worry about a global architecture team. but it also allows there to be some standards that are passed on from the very top that help to keep everything at an enterprise level somewhat in sync. So that's been the idea of sort of a global versus local model. My name is J.M. Erlinson. Once again, you've been the listener. I've been helping you out with a couple of my best practices on the art of the possible with ARIS. Please like, share, subscribe. Find anything you'd like, leave me a comment. I'd love to respond to anything and help to provide more videos and share my love for the ARIS platform. Until the next one, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.